What can we do to reduce crime to the extent that it can be reduced?
There are no easy solutions. I'll tell you what I think government should do in a nutshell. I think, first of all, we need to decide that we want to be serious about combating crime. And if we don't deal with the drug problem in this country, in my opinion, we're not going to make a very big dent in terms of dealing with crime. Because as I mentioned before, I am convinced that 80% of violent crimes are caused by people who have a drug habit.
Why do so many people take drugs?
I couldn't tell you that reason.
Isn't it because they have mistaken values? Isn't it because
I don't
they
think
that
it's that
they...
easy.
Well,
I think that's really being very overly simplistic. I think that...
Well, why do people do what they do in life?
There are lots of different reasons why people do. I don't think there's one reason why people do things. I think that the makeup of each individual determines what he or she does, and I don't know that it has to do... One person's values may not be in line with another person's values.
Does a person's conclusions about life determine what they do?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
Well, I mean, we need a theory of behavior. We need to, in order to explain why so many people are taking drugs.
I'm not
Obviously,
a sociology professor at a university.
Okay, but this it's relevant
laws.
in establishing a relationship of cause and effect. To establish what is the cause of the fundamental cause of crime.
No.
We're agreed that people that take drugs more often commit crimes. Then we need to know is why do so many people take drugs? Let me ask you this question.
You can ask them. I don't take drugs, so
right.
I'm not the one to ask.
Okay, this is my question. If you persuaded people that it was not in their own self-interest to commit crimes, would that reduce crime?
I don't think when people commit crimes, they think that it's in self-interest or not. Frankly, I think if you provide people with jobs, you will reduce the crime rate. I think that job training and jobs is very important. I think that if someone has a job and they're a productive citizen, they are less likely to commit a crime. If someone has no job and they have despair and they have no hope of getting a job and they have no skills to get a job, I think that's a person that's more likely to commit a crime.
But if a person thought that it was against his self-interest, would he be less likely to commit crimes? Don't people usually try to achieve their own self-interest?
I think that if someone thinks it's not within their self-interest to commit a crime, they obviously won't commit a crime.
So if we had a rationale available to persuade them of that fact, then that would be one attack on crime, one prong. Let me ask you this. Do you think it's against anybody's self-interest to commit crimes, to lead the life of crime?
I don't understand
Do you think personally that it is against any human being's self-interest to lead a life of crime? You think it actually harms?
Obviously, being a criminal is destructive. It's destructive to them and it's destructive to society.
Right, to themselves,
and
I'm
it's
asking.
destructive to others, okay?
Can you make that demonstration? Can you prove to your fellow citizens that it's against their self-interest to commit crimes?
You assume with that question that everybody is a logical person.
No,
and
just
that
some.
everybody can be rationally spoken to and rationally dissuaded from committing a crime. And there are lots of different people that are out there. And there are lots of people who commit crimes for whatever reason. And I don't think it's as easy. I don't think it's simplistic. I think that you state it as if it's kind of simplistic, and if we can just convince people that their behavior is self-destructive or against their self-interest, they'll stop committing crimes.
Should we attempt to persuade some of them, at least?
I think that what we need to do...
You don't think that's a good idea?
In a nutshell, I think that what we need to do, and again, it's not the absolute panacea or solution, I think we ought to give people a feeling of self-worth. We ought to give people a feeling that they have a hope and they have a future. We ought to let people fulfill their abilities.
Don't they have to give that to themselves? And then if they commit crimes,
we ought to throw the book at them.
Don't they have to produce those values themselves? This is my other question.
It's not my business
Let me ask
anybody else's business. I believe to be
right,
a social worker.
Right.
It's my business.
They have to produce these values themselves. Let me ask you this question. If a higher percentage of criminals are caught and punished, would that reduce crime? If a higher percentage of criminals were caught and punished, would that reduce crime?
Caught and punished?
Yeah, caught and punished. Would that reduce crime?
Well, we have, you would think it would reduce crime, except we have more people incarcerated in this country than ever before, and the crime levels still seem to be rising.
So
I don't know. You know, you would say logically that if you get rid of the criminals by putting them in jail and having tough laws, you would help to eradicate crime, and yet we are expanding our prisons like crazy. We have more people incarcerated in this country than ever before, and yet crime is on the upswing. So it just boils down to what I said when I opened the program, that I think the whole question of crime is a very complex question. I don't think that you can pigeonhole and put things in slots. I think it's a societal problem. I think that getting at the drug problem is absolutely necessary.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think
that the last
conse-
question, because
okay.
then I have to run. I have a
Okay. Do you
missing.
think that the consequences of a person's actions affect their motivation? In other words, if a person knows that there's a high probability of being caught and punished, will that not affect his motivation with regards to that action?
Yes, I would think it would.
So then, catching people at a higher rate and punishing them would reduce crime.
I think that swift and certain punishment does reduce crime.
I thought
and should
before you
reduce
were
crime.
arguing that it wouldn't.
I never argued that it wouldn't.
Oh, okay. So then you are in agreement that
Well,
a higher
The problem
rate
that I have is
of
that
catching people and punishing them would reduce crime.
No. You see, the problem I have with your questions and your line of questions is that you ask them with the premise that there is a simple solution to getting rid of crime. If someone believes that they are going to be caught and punished, okay, one would think that that would be a deterrent to crime.
You agree, don't you?
I do agree.
So then,
However, what we are doing
that
in
would
this
reduce
country,
crime.
what we are doing in this country, is we are incarcerating more and more people, and yet we don't see any lessening in crime statistics.
we catch a very small percentage of criminal activity. In
If
fact,
we-
isn't that not so?
Yes, and if
Only
we,
I think it's about 2% of criminal activity is caught.
if we jailed everybody who committed a crime, okay, we would have the population, the jail population in this country would not double or triple or quadruple. It would be even more.
You're not
And
in
if we
favor
have-
of catching and punishing the people that commit crimes?
Of course I am.
So then why are you saying that this would be a problem?
It's a problem because we don't have enough jail space to hold all these people. And if people don't want to pay more taxes to build more jails, we won't have enough jail space.
If we
So-
were restricting crimes to those actions that are intentional violations of other people's rights, then we would have less crimes on the book, and we can concentrate on those crimes that are actually real crimes. We wouldn't be worrying about a lot of other stuff that aren't
Well,
really crimes.
What are you saying?
We would
that
have enough space.
White collar crime shouldn't
No,
be punished?
I think that it should. I think it should. That's a violation of somebody's rights. That's stealing their property. Certainly. Let me ask you one last question.
Okay,
Um,
that got to be the last because I really got to run out of here.
Okay. If there were more and better role models of virtue in the movies, in books, on television, and in the personal lives of potential criminals, would that reduce crime?
I think that it's likely that if we had better role models, okay, it would be likely to reduce crime. I don't think in itself that it would reduce crime.
So it would be a helpful thing.
Yeah, as I said before, there are many different things that come together to cause crime, and there are many different things that need to come together to try to get at the crime problem.
So
I said before that I was opposed to all the violence on TV, and I don't like a lot of the violence in the movies, and I think that there ought to be more responsibility, and less of that ought to be shown to children. Will that in itself make crime lessen? I don't know, but I certainly think it would be helpful to not have kids turn on the television and see one type of violence after another, after another, after another.
okay, so don't you think there's been a failure in our intellectual leadership as far as demonstrating why crime is harmful to the person that commits the crime, it's against his own self-interest, a failure in the Justice Department in apprehending a high percentage of criminal activity, and also a failure in our artistic community to provide those examples that would serve as illustration to younger people and people in general and role models so that they wouldn't commit crimes. And if there wasn't those three failures, would we not have a lot less crime in the United States today?
I think those are failures. I